Today on the Videomaker Podcast, Chris and I talked to Joanna, Naugle, and Evan Buxbaum, the editor and EP of Some Good News, respectively. If you haven't seen Some Good News, it's a YouTube series that you really should check out, started by John Krasinski. It started just at the beginning of the pandemic when it hit the United States, and it's really kind of a entertainment and news show, which is, very positive in nature. It kind of went viral as everyone, started to become stuck in their homes. Really, really fantastic series, and I encourage you to check it out. Also, if you've been listening to the podcast and you enjoy it, as always, we would love it if you went over to iTunes and gave us a 5-star review. iTunes is still the place where podcasts are made or broken. So those 5-star reviews are really helpful for podcasts like ours. Okay, so enough with the announcements. Let's get started. Welcome to the Videomaker Podcast. I'm Mike Wilhelm, and with me, as always, across the building this time, Chris Marlux.
And like above you. So it's a different organization than we normally do, but
that's right.
I'm looking down on you. So it's like Brady Bunch.
Yeah, we need like a center position, like if Nicole was here, she'd be the center position.
You're right.
Also, a special guest today, we have Evan Buxbaum, the EP on Some Good News, or SGN, and Joanna Naugle, editor of Some Good News. How's it going, guys?
Very good. Going great.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having us.
Good.
Glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So where are you guys calling us from today?
I am calling from my place in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn.
And I'm actually calling in from my parents' place in New Jersey, Union County.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we were just talking about how that's like one of the luxuries of, if there is any luxuries of our situation today, is we can all kind of be wherever we want to be, right?
Very
true.
true.
Whether we want to be there or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, before we get started, if people who are listening haven't seen Some Good News, they really should check it out. This is a YouTube series started by John Krasinski of The Office fame, and Evan, you were the EP on the project. Maybe you could tell us, how did this project get started exactly?
Yeah, of course. I was one of a couple EPs on the show. For us, really, it started with a pretty random text on a Sunday morning. We got a text from a friend of a friend who knows John Krasinski, and John was looking for someone to partner with to edit and bring it through in post and sort of help on the back end production side. And that was actually the first morning. That morning was the day that the first episode launched. So we were put in touch with John Krasinski for the first time about 12 hours before it launched.
Wow.
And we worked all day. For us, the challenge that day was just to, quite frankly, get out an episode in one day. And that was it. That was the beginning of the whole process. It was wild.
Now there was I guess this must have been a soft deadline, I guess, right? Since there's no scheduled airtime. We're talking about a YouTube series, right?
Yeah, it was a soft deadline in the way that it wasn't a soft deadline. They always, John had always had the idea of getting it out Sunday nights as sort of like an end of week, beginning of week show. And we really wanted to honor that, obviously, as challenging as it then became, for anyone who's ever worked on a weekly show. I think all those people probably know how time intensive that is and what an insane crunch it can be. Like shows like SNL come to mind, but there are a lot of YouTube shows that do it as well. And so, that day was a pretty insane ride. And then it kind of continued in that way for the next 8 weeks. It just sort of seems like when you have a weekly show, no matter how much time you have, it's always like 1 second enough. You can always fill it no matter how much you have, especially when it's only like 3 or 4 days for 20 minutes.
And now you both are part of a business post house, Senior Post, I guess, right? So Evan, you were the EP, and Joanna, you're a partner at Senior Post, but you're also the editor of this project, right?
Correct. Yes.
So were you looped in basically at the same time? You had to jump in the day that it was supposed to go live or be published, I should say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the great thing about Senior Post is our core team is really small. So when a really exciting opportunity comes in, kind of the 5 of us all attack it together. And for something like this that was really time sensitive, we kind of put our heads together, and it was like one of the first Sundays in quarantine, and I was like, wow, what am I going to do today? I guess like clean out my closet. Like I was like, I don't even know what I'm going to do. And then all of a sudden this project came in like a hurricane, but in a really fun way that we all kind of put our heads together and we're like, okay, they want this to go live tonight. How much can we do to it before then to make it feel, more exciting and, more representative of the work we want to do and make it as appealing to as many people as possible.
So the first episode that I saw of SGN was the Hamilton episode. That wasn't the first one though, right? There was a couple before that.
That was the second episode. The first one was the interview with Steve Carell, where it was basically just John and him kind of talking and reminiscing. It was like, I think the 15-year anniversary of The Office. And so they were kind of reliving some of their favorite moments and reconnecting. And then, Hamilton was the second week.
So I just remember watching the Hamilton episode, and I was thinking, man, this must have been a huge pain to put together. Like, Chris and I were talking about this before this podcast started, because we were trying to get all of this stuff in order, right? Like the four of us on screen and recording, and you guys had, I don't know how many people there were. There must have been like 15 people on screen at the time, right?
26.
And audio syncing issues, right? Everyone has to be in time with one another. So, I mean, I guess in one sense it's fortunate that wasn't the first episode, but after you turned out that episode with Steve Carell, did the next one, like literally it took you like, I guess not the whole week, they had to shoot the thing, I guess, right? But what was the post-production process like, the difference between those two episodes?
Yeah, so the first week we kind of inherited the project, and so we took it over for kind of just the last stretch. And the second week was the first week where we came in earlier, and by earlier I mean like Thursday. So it still was a really tight turnaround, just because they need those first couple of days to check everyone's availability and get all their ducks in a row. And I guess without giving away too much of the editing magic behind Hamilton, which wasn't, it's not a secret or anything, but it was basically like kind of like half live done and half individual videos the cast had sent, because they had done some practicing and it was tough getting the timing exactly right. And so having the individual videos as backup to cut to was able to make everything feel a little bit more seamless. But the little girl Aubrey was still completely surprised that was all authentic, and Lin-Manuel Miranda popping up in the screen, that was a very genuine reaction from her losing her mind. And the cast was just like so gracious to be able to practice doing all of it and then pulling it off for her, then sending us the backup videos. So there was a lot of layers of video. I forget how many exactly, I think like 21 or something with all the different cast videos, but it was fun to put it together. I love the soundtrack. So I was like, I've been practicing for this job for the last 2 years because I listened to Hamilton 400 times. So I was very qualified to edit that piece.
That was something that I think continued on sort of throughout the series. Everything was real as you saw it. It was live. It was real. That stuff was being done for real. None of the reactions, people were fabricated. But we always tried as much as possible to get another take from the people who were dialing in, just in case something went wrong. So what you're seeing is the majority of it is it happening in real time. But every now and again, we had the ability to cut in an alternate take from our pre-planned call-in, from Martha Stewart or Oprah, et cetera. So we tried to get a little bit of extra there, just to have something to cut with. And that was pretty much the whole show was like that.
So Chris and I were speculating about how everything came together, and we assumed that everyone was singing along to a recording in their ear. So that was the timekeeper. Is that about how it came together, or were they literally trying to like keep in time with each other over Zoom?
So for the actual surprise of Aubrey, they were singing all together, and it actually sounded pretty good, and we did use some of those vocals. And then for the rest of the cast, everyone had the same recording. It might have even been just the original cast recording. And then they all sang that, at the same starting point. And so we could sync that up on our end, and then kind of layer them as needed.
Makes sense.
yeah, and then mixed together, everyone recording. They were basically listening in headphones, recording their own audio. And then Jay, our wonderful mixer, was able to, level it out a little bit. And I mean, these are like, such raw, talented people that they were just like, oh yeah, I'll just record this on my iPhone real quick. And it sounded amazing. So it's pretty impressive.
That song's got to be like the click track in the studio, right? It's just you got to sync everybody together. The performance is their skill and their ability, but with technical latency, that's a hard thing to sync up and amongst so many people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. We definitely had a little bit of help in the editing room of making sure it all lined up correctly, but I really didn't have to do too much, which was great. Everyone had a really solid take, and they had performed it together so many times, probably for a whole year on Broadway, that that was definitely an added benefit of them knowing the timing really well and knowing how to replicate the same thing over and over.
So is it safe to assume that that the post-production team is all working remotely out of their homes or their families' homes?
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone was working, our team is pretty much all in the tri-state area, our immediate team. And then in some of the later episodes, we were working with people on the West Coast, which proved to be a huge advantage because their day started a little later and ended later. And we were kind of dividing the episodes into segments. So we could be like, okay, you work on this part, I'll work on this part, then we'll swap project files, we'll put them together. Our online editor, Christian, was really good about, making sure he had a copy of all the media as well. So we could just be reconnecting files pretty seamlessly without losing time being like, oh, did you download this? You have this. And then it allowed us to swap things back and forth in a way that we wouldn't normally have to do if we were sitting next to each other, but was crucial to be able to pull this off remotely.
It's totally accurate to say that since the first day that we ever heard of Some Good News, none of us have seen each other in person. And none of us have ever met John in person or his production team, Sunday Night Productions. None of us have ever been in the same room since the show started, which is kind of a crazy turn of events for 2020, but here we are.
Very true.
So before all this happened, I assume you guys at Senior Post were all working out of the same facility. So is this new for you?
Brand new. Yeah, we have a beautiful post house in Dumbo in Brooklyn. We actually have it's the largest post house in Brooklyn. Also the largest not open post house in Brooklyn right now, with all the other ones. So that's been kind of wild. But yeah, we've all been working from home, but our facility is there, and hopefully we get to go back to it pretty soon.
So I'd imagine the hardest part about this, outside of not being able to look at each other in the eye, molecularly, is just like the transferring of files and sharing that kind of stuff. Am I right about that, or are you guys encountering other challenges as well?
The organizational aspect was definitely something we got really good at by the last week, and it seemed like we had 8 weeks to kind of perfect this, and I think the last week was the most seamless it went because we learned a little something every week about if you're recording a Zoom and save the file, it's always going to be labeled just Zoom 0. And so the third week we realized, we need to start putting, Zoom 0 Oprah or Zoom 0 Spielberg if you're going to be having multiple Zooms that you're recording. And so we basically had like a list, like a Google Doc that had all the links to things we would need to download. So every editor and assistant editor and the online editor had a separate download of all the files named the exact same way so that when you're reconnecting a project file, it would easily just know where to relink up things. But that's difficult. Obviously, things slip through the cracks. This show, we're constantly hearing, add this other tweet and, add this video. So that can come in really last minute. So our post producer, Liz, was really good about saying, we got a new asset. Let's put it in this document. So that when people say, I'm missing the video of, the old man singing to his wife in a nursing home, we can look back and see where it was instead of digging through emails and, Slack conversations. If you weren't extremely organized, that stuff could get lost so easily.
So there's lots of sources of footage, right? So you have John's camera, you have the Zoom calls, you have like a bunch of, YouTube videos and TikTok videos and all that kind of stuff, right? So who are you guys collecting all those things, or is that someone on John's team that's doing screen recordings or going to the source for these original recordings? How are you guys collecting everything?
Yeah, sort of all of the above. There was a pretty robust back-end team associated with it, of which we are a very small part. There was a social team, there was a team pulling social quotes, there was a team doing social work, there was a whole team associated with that. John and his team were combing. Obviously, footage was coming from all over the places. If you think about it, sort of like a large funnel that had multiple inputs, and it would all sort of funnel down into the distiller of John and his production company. And then that funnel would flow to us. We would take it, turn it into some form of an edit, and then begin going through rounds of review and swapping things in and out of the funnel, and giving it back to John for approval. I think that's pretty much the process, but Joanna, let me know if that sounds about right to you.
Oh, no, yeah, definitely. I mean, John's team really drove the process with pulling the tweets and choosing who to highlight. And then we would then have our assistant editors rip those assets from there, put them all together. And obviously John was doing all that recording himself in his house. So he would send those files to us, via Dropbox or something like that. And then we would be putting it together in the timeline. But they really were like, here are the assets, you collect them, organize them, and make it into something that has, structure to it.
Every week, the structure of the week pretty much went, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, John and the team and everyone were deciding what this week was going to be. So, everyone was deciding what the episode's going to be. And sort of all that pulling would begin at that point around Tuesday or Wednesday, Thursday. Thursday, Friday would be production. And that was obviously John in his house with, some cameras and his wife, Emily, obviously, whoever was there. All of the news sections would be filmed at that point. So moving into Friday, Saturday, Sunday is when we would start cutting all of this up and put it together. So every week we had about 2.5 to 3 days, if we were lucky, to cut, the full episode. And the rest of the week progressed like that. And then, Sunday was always like the end game, which was like finish the cut and, try to get a sound pass on it and get it out, which is always proved for a very exciting Sunday.
So, is this type of, quick turnaround TV style workflow normal for you guys, or is this a new thing that you guys have had to learn?
I'd say weekly stuff like this is new. We're not accustomed traditionally. In the past, our company doesn't do a lot of weekly shows like this. We did do a bunch of shows. We do post on a bunch of shows that Joanna can talk about more that are always fast paced, but they're much longer. Joanna's finishing up. She's the editor on Romney on Hulu right now, and they're finishing that up. And there's always a rush, but it's never turning around one episode from start to finish in a week. So a little bit different in that regard, something we're adjusting to there.
Mm-hmm. Now, the kind of the aesthetic of the show, at least from the photography side of things, it makes you feel like as you're watching it that, oh, this is John Krasinski with his iPhone, and then he's taking this footage and tinkering at home, and he's putting this thing out. But the editing is very tight. So I'm curious about whether or not that sort of side of the show that is. It seems like it's intentionally got kind of a YouTuber aesthetic to it, has afforded you any kind of leniency or room to I don't know, just like do things that you wouldn't get away with on a show like Romney.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put that leniency in making it feel a little bit homemade. And I remember we had a whole discussion early on about, should we be putting more graphics into this? Should we be making it look a little bit more slick? And John and John's team was really like, no, we want this to feel like anyone could make this at home. And by the last episode, we were able to highlight a lot of people who recreated their own SGN. And I think that is kind of the beauty of it, is everyone's at home, maybe having this pent up creativity. And if this is something that, kids or even adults are inspired to recreate on your own, that's so fun, and hopefully bringing other people joy. So that's kind of like the heart of why the show was made to begin with. but yeah, I mean, compared to other shows, we were, you know, maybe punching in on things that got a little pixelated, or, you know, adding in videos that are a little bit grainy or the audio peaks. But if they had the emotion and they had that kind of like human representation, that was what mattered more. And, you know, these episodes aren't passing QC. They're not going through, you know, they don't need to be displayed in 4K. It was like, oh, well, we only have this video of, you know, these two people hugging after being in quarantine at, you know, 720p. Should we still use it? And the answer was always yes, of course. Like, it makes us cry. Let's use it. So I definitely think that they intentionally were like, it's okay if it's a little rough around the edges, as long as it makes people feel something.
Yeah, VHS accepted here.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So now, go ahead, Chris.
When I was watching it, what I noticed is just there's a lot of room noise in John's stand-up or you know, whatever he's doing there, and that there had to have been a point where it was like, well, we could get him a mic, but there's not necessary for the format or, of course, the charm of the homemade feel to it. We make a lot of content for just YouTube, but we're also trying to teach people how to make the best type of video you can. So it's always a hard fight. It's like, does a jump cut, is that acceptable? You know, is a little peaking or those kinds of things, or a little pixelation, is that acceptable? And it's really all about the destination there. Though I think it's also more format based, but YouTube has so many people breaking the rules that people have just accepted so many of them not being, distorting the sound is a meme. You know, it's people play with it, you know.
And a lot of times we would just have, sorry, Evan,
please go ahead.
I was going to say, like, if we were recording, you know, we're on Zoom right now and there's 4 of us. And if we really wanted to have a single of someone to hide a cut, a lot of times we were just zooming in on them and it would get a little pixely, but also that could also be someone's internet connection wasn't that good. So we also were able to get away with stuff because everyone knows that it's a little bit ragtag, DIY, scrappy, you know, production making. So I personally don't mind that, you know, like having it feel a little bit rough around the edges. But that was definitely one thing that we were like, we wouldn't be able to get away with this always, but right now having it a little bit pixelated is okay.
That's going to be the new internet transition for video, is like the short on connection pixelation. And then all of a sudden it cuts to something else. It's like, oh, you just got to cover something up and you did it fakely, not because your internet dropped. That's clever.
Exactly.
It's actually this is sort of anecdotal, but we have done another few jobs since SGN where we've done live events with people sort of on the commercial side. And we found ourselves in one job we did recently, somebody's internet connection was really good. And we were like auto buffering it. Like we in the edit, we were stuttering it to like fix some like cuts and make it match other people's footage. Like that's the kind of crazy world we're in right now, where we're, you know, basically taking footage and putting a bad internet connection like layer on it.
Yeah, every camera manufacturer is just running as fast as they can to make it so that their camera can be a webcam, so that finally the news can have, you know, deeper, better shots from home and whatnot. I don't imagine many of them are going to be able to get it out in time enough, but you can tell if anybody's into photography when you see their, oh, your shot's a little nicer. Okay, you don't have a bunch of headroom. It's not just a talking head, literally.
Yeah. Like Mike's shot was beautiful. It was killing it.
It was.
Yeah.
Now, the cave he's in now, terrible, but before it was great.
My webcam was a C200, and now it's an iMac. Okay, so let's see. We got a handful of other questions for you, but before we get to them, I just want to take a quick ad break, and we'll be right back.
For years, Videomaker has been producing quality video training to help you take your video skills to the next level. Now you can access it all from a Videomaker Plus account. We've got courses covering everything from learning how to navigate your camera with our course on camera controls and settings, to learning about color grading, or even how to start a video business. Videomaker Plus has something for you. The Videomaker library is split into 4 levels. If you're just starting, try our inexpensive starter level membership, which gets you access to essential video training and a digital subscription to Videomaker magazine. For the most professional training, go all the way up to our professional tier membership, which gives you access to our entire library of training, which covers advanced concepts like running a video business or becoming a documentary filmmaker. Plus, the professional tier is the only membership with access to our popular webinar recordings. Plus, right now, for a limited time, you can get the professional tier of Videomaker Plus for the price of the creative tier. That's $100 savings. Sign up at videomaker.com/springdeal. That's videomaker.com/springdeal.
Okay, and we're back. So the big news actually of the last week or so is the fact that Some Good News was acquired by CBS. And I guess I'm just wondering, like, first of all, do you know if that means that you guys are going to continue to be the post house for the show? And then secondly, do you have any speculation about what that means for the show itself outside of John being gone? This is the sort of homemade aesthetic, you know, the fact that it lives on YouTube. Any ideas about what might happen there?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, whether we're going to continue to work on it, indications are that we will, and we hope that that is the case, obviously, and we'd be very excited to. So that's all very preliminary, and again, have no exact idea there yet, but it looks as though we will have an opportunity to, and really, obviously, extraordinarily excited for that next step. In terms of what it's going to turn into, you know, those talks are all obviously very early. I have what I, think it could turn into. I think there are a lot of really wonderful opportunities for it to make its way into the CBS family in a news capacity, segments there as a show. You know, there's obviously a lot of conversations going on there. I think there's a really beautiful opportunity for it to bring some of that DIY ethos and some of that connection to its audience ethos. I think, for me, that was one of the really impressive things about the show was the way in which it engaged audiences. And that will obviously be different in a CBS community, in a CBS platform. But I think there's ways that this show can really bring that to that platform, and that would be really exciting. Ways in which the audience can still interact, ways in which we can have these fun sort of interactions with the people who are watching it, which really makes the ecosystem and the experience so different from anything that's happening on TV right now. I think that's what I'm really excited for, and just can't wait to see where it goes.
I think it's really interesting because you got the first couple episodes are happening at the same time, and all the late night shows had to figure out what they're doing, and that they're doing the same thing. I mean, it's different in that it's along. Some product already exists out there or whatever, but it's just interesting that they're mimicking what can be done that way. I remember Mike and I talking about it just before. What is going to come? Are people going to accept webcams on television? We kind of got that a little bit, but it would be like the second someone started to drop, it'd be like, okay, and we're moving on, versus now kind of hanging with them or having planned for those kinds of things to play along. Do you guys, I mean, I feel you guys are pretty influential in that. Do you see in the same way of that you might have influenced the big dogs into coming down to your level a little bit different?
Yeah, I mean, I think the show definitely did. Us ending up in the middle of that is just one of those things where you wake up one morning and you just happen to be in the right place at the right time. And I think we're all incredibly thankful for that opportunity and to have ended up in the middle of that. For me, this show, SGN, did in many ways what a lot of other shows couldn't, because it was born in this environment. There was no other world where this show really could have been made. Not only could it be made during this pandemic, but this was like sort of the only time it could have been made. It was like, this was the time when this was meant to be born. And so when for other shows that were trying to transition into this world, I think it was in some ways natively tougher. We didn't have any preconceptions. It just was a show that had to be right now. And I think factors led us to be involved with that and, led it to happen in the world. And it was sort of this incredible moment. I think it was very unique for this show, and definitely in my life in terms of being involved with shows.
So I want to bring it back to the editing process. Videomaker audience is all about learning how to be better editors. They're people who want to, do what you're doing sometime, right? So, there's like this extra dynamic now that everyone, well, maybe it's not an extra dynamic, but everyone is a part. You're all editing this project, which was, I guess, an 8-week project. Is that right? And so there's more than 8 episodes, I think, right? There's like a couple of short 2-minute things, but At any rate, I want to know, like, what's the collaboration process like during editorial? Like, Joanna, are you really the owner of that timeline, or are other people in there? Are you doing like a collaborative timeline process? How does it work?
Yeah, well, for the first couple of weeks, it was really just our core team, and was primarily just me and an assistant editor putting it together. And then another thing that kind of naturally happened each week was things kept getting a little bit bigger and bigger. I mean, the first week was just primarily John and Steve Carell on, Skype or on Zoom. And then from there, it was like, all right, well, let's add in the Hamilton cast. And then, all right, let's have them go to Fenway with, like the Red Sox and, have that whole element, and then a cooking show and then a live prom. So we kind of got to the point that we needed multiple editors working on it. So especially in the later weeks, we would kind of break it into sections. So when we were doing the wedding office Zoom, we work with a great editor, Ernie Gilbert in LA, and he just kind of owned that section, and I owned the news part, because otherwise it would have been too much for one person to do in 72 hours. And so he knew all of that footage inside and out, and I knew all of the news segments, so that when we got notes, we could just go. And then really only for the last maybe 12 hours of the day, like midday on Sunday, it was like, okay, let's put it all together, stitch it together, and then go from there. But otherwise, it just seemed like it would have been impossible to kind of keep up with the rounds and making everyone happy if we hadn't broken it down into segments. So once we kind of figured out the best breaking points for that, we were able to kind of pass things back and forth a little more. And it was fun to send a cut to Ernie and be like, what do you think? Does anything feel weird here? Or, kind of like go back and forth. And then, as he's doing notes, he's like, actually, I saw this in the footage. You should use that. And it was good to like tag team it, because it's going so fast. You're like, I guess I just need to trust my gut and make this cut. And so it's great having the immediate team and then another editor to be like, this makes sense, right? Like, this is good and heartwarming, because you sometimes lose track of that in the whirlwind.
Now, you had 72 hours with the content. How much of that 72 hours were you working? Because, I mean, you got to sleep, right? But
Yeah.
I imagine some pretty heavy days.
71.5.
Well, that was also the great thing about working with people on the West Coast was, we would start working at, we would maybe do like a 12-hour day most of those days, so like 10 to 10. But if they started at 1 our time, then they could keep going for another 3 hours. So on those days, it was kind of fun to wake up in the morning and be like, okay, what did they get done last night? Or, seeing that they sent a Slack link at 2 a.m. our time. And I was like, oh man, yeah, I was definitely needed to sleep. So basically I would say from like end of day Thursday through end of day Sunday was like, you break to eat and, take a quick walk around the block, and then you're like back in until you go to sleep. So thank you to my boyfriend for cooking for me all of those days. I was like, I'll eat anything, just make me food. But it was a fun marathon for sure. And, waking up on Monday morning, like exhausted and just like, how did we pull that off, to then see like the views just coming in and getting texts from family members being like, this part made me cry, or I loved this. Like, I kept saying to the team every week, my grandma would text me and be like, I loved this part. So that was just a fun way to connect and be like, literally 12 hours ago, I was, crazy putting this together, and now everyone in the world is seeing it. That is very surreal.
So regarding the tools that you guys are using, I know that our audience always likes to hear when people who are working on big projects are using tools that they're using. So I've heard Slack so far. You guys are using Google Documents to collaborate on sort of organizational aspects of it. I understand. I've heard a rumor that you guys are Premiere users. Is that right?
Correct. I'm a Premiere diehard. I'll put up with all the bugs. I love it still.
Now, when you guys are, collaborating with other editors, are you literally sending Premiere files back and forth, or are you uploading videos to, the web and sharing the cut as it's assembled?
So when we're sending them to clients, we'll export videos and share them primarily on, I guess, WeTransfer and Vimeo. And then we'll send Premiere projects back and forth over Slack, or more likely actually in WeTransfer, and be like, I ripped these 3 videos. Here are the missing assets, and here's the project. Making it really clear what the sequence is. And if the project is getting a little bit too heavy, we just export, just that sequence to make it a lighter project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so when you're sending those files back and forth, are your collaborators actually like making adjustments in the timeline and sending them back to you saying, here's what I did to it?
Yeah, so we definitely use like the markers feature a lot to kind of be like, this section changed, or need to add transition here, or not crazy about the music. We definitely were able to leave each other little notes of like, here's what changed from last time, because it was easy to kind of get lost in that if we're doing a lot of cuts and sending them back and forth.
Interesting. So, sorry, one sec. I had a technical glitch here.
I heard a little music in there.
Yeah, one of the downsides of working out of the office here.
I was going to say, I heard a little bit of noise back here too, so it could have been. If you need me to redo anything, let me know.
Okay, no, it's fine. It's fine. So what was it like with the file transfers? Like, is John like literally using his iPhone or his phone to capture this footage, or are you sending like major files back and forth? It must be difficult on home networks, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I mean, Evan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe John had 2 iPhones basically set up on tripods, and every once in a while he would, you'd see him setting it up, and he did a couple of time lapses throughout the season of seeing his section going like that. Setting up everything to get things ready for the audience. But he was really just using iPhones. And so the files were relatively light going back and forth, which was really nice. Once we started getting into some of the Zooms that were a little bit longer, the files got slightly bigger. But again, we weren't really sending 4K footage back and forth. And that also was just a necessity, but also worked for the aesthetic of the show to keep things, around 1080p.
So I want to throw like a curveball at you guys, and if you don't have an easy answer, that's okay. But
who shot JFK?
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you have like a single tip that you were going to give an editor, like an editor who's like coming up in the industry, or an editor who just wants to improve their skills. What would that tip be? What's that secret? And Joanna, maybe since you're leading the discussion on editing, you go first.
All right, this is a good question. I think my tip would be, don't be afraid to kind of put a bomb in your edit and try something completely weird and different. I think it can be scary to kind of take something apart and put it back together. But when I get to the point where I'm like kind of happy with an edit and don't know what to do next, I always just like duplicate the sequence and then try to basically make either the shortest or longest possible version of something. Something that I love when I'm cutting a short film or like a feature film is to try to cut like a mini trailer, even if it's not going to go anywhere, just to be like, okay, what if I distill this down to just the most essential information? What do I need to put in it? And that usually helps me going back to the edit to be like, oh, this was totally unnecessary. Why was I putting so much weight in this? Or actually, this is like the crux of what we're trying to say. So I think that's especially helpful in narrative, but documentary too, if you're trying to tell a story, there's so many ways that it can go. If you really just try to distill it down, that really helps me kind of shed some light on what's most important. So I'd say, yeah, don't be afraid to take risks and know that like in modern editing, you can always go back to where you were. So why not just, play around and have fun? Because a lot of times happy accidents will just, be your favorite, end up being your favorite part of a project.
So that's like the modern way to force yourself into killing your darlings, I guess, right? That whole idea.
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm saying. Don't be too precious with anything, because I think that's really the role of an editor too, is, if you're writing a project, if you're directing a project, you're so close to it. Like, it's our job as editors to be, really honest and thoughtful about what can go in order to tell the best story. And we're the first audience coming to the footage. We need to have good instincts about what's working and what's not. And, if it's not working, sometimes you have to be the bearer of bad news, but if it's the right choice, then you got to fight for that.
And I would imagine that, running a post house as you guys do, that must happen all the time, where you're in love with a certain sequence or a certain, way that you edited something and your client just kills it, right? Like, does it take a while to develop a thick skin for that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think you got to learn not to get too attached to some things or know, when to fight for them. And I think choosing your battles is something that you learn just from experience, where sometimes you're like, am I really attached to this because it's the best possible thing for this piece, or just because I was up till 2 a.m. cutting it? And just because you spent 12 hours working on something doesn't mean it's good. So if you really, think that what you did was worth keeping, then choose those moments to fight for. Because if you just push back on everything, then people won't really take it seriously when you're like, no, we need to keep this in, regardless of how long you worked on it.
Good advice. Evan, you have a secret for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, as may have become pretty apparent by now, I'm not an editor. So on that side, I probably don't have the best advice. My advice would land you as not an editor, because that's what happened.
Not don't be an editor, right?
Not don't be an editor. But if you follow my advice, you probably will not end up as an editor. That said, from the other side of things, coming from the perspective of someone who has worked with a lot of editors and who works with editors all the time, I would say my one piece of advice for editors who are starting out would be, don't ever not take a job because you think it's beneath you. Or because the money is bad, or because, there's something that like at an early phase is like, could be seen as insulting, just because so often, in this industry, it moves so fast, both on the production and, on the original side and on the commercial side, that you find with people you find in crazy situations where maybe the job doesn't have enough money or it's too fast. And I found that people who are willing to just dive in to jobs like that, I've worked with for years. And what would have seemed like a pretty weird job originally, has led to decades of like work and great experiences with someone. So I would just say, don't ever turn something down that's a small thing or that you think is beneath you.
All right, great advice. And I'm hearing that someone's cat sounds like they're hungry or something.
And also, don't ever lock your cat, losing his mind. So, sorry about that, guys.
No worries. It's good timing, and maybe it's a good spot to wrap it up.
The cat says it's done, so we got to end it.
Cat says podcast is over.
Cat is over it. Yeah.
All right, Joanna, Evan, thanks so much for giving us some time today.
Yes, of course. This was really fun.
Thank you guys so much for having us. We appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks to our guests Joanna Naugle and Evan Buxbaum for joining us. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, we'd love it if you went to iTunes or Spotify or whatever podcast app you use and hit the subscribe button. It's a big help for small podcasts like ours. For Chris Monlux and everyone here at Videomaker, I'm Mike Wilhelm, and you've been listening to the Videomaker Podcast. We'll catch you next time.